What's up, friends? Happy Friday. Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast. We made it to Friday, which means we officially made it as promised the second time around. We made it to TJ Slayton Day, which I could not be more excited to talk about TJ Slayton today. If you've been following me on Twitter, so far of the players from this draft class, I think it's safe to say that TJ Slayton has been the one that I've kind of gotten a little bit geeked up about so far, just kind of going through and watching his tape more and more. So today's breakdown, very similar to the ones that I have done up until this point. I will link all the other ones, the first four draft picks that I've already done with the deep dives up until this point at the bottom of this or in the description page. So right below, make sure to check those out after this if you have not already. But I'll be making my 12 observations after watching, in this case, 6 games of TJ Slayton, all from 2020. I watched the Texas A&M game, Georgia, Missouri, Vanderbilt, Kentucky, and LSU. As always, watching the all 22 version of the tape, or in this case, a lot of it was the end zone version of the tape, but you get my point. So as usual, I'll go through all 12 observations, the good, the bad, the indifferent, and so on and so forth, to help you guys at least get a better understanding of the player that TJ Slayton is and hopefully what he has the ability to become. So let's start out with the low-hanging fruit here, and that is the easiest observation to make is that TJ Slayton has incredible size and incredible strength. He is 330 pounds, 6'4", and just raw human strength and really fun to watch on the field. And he knows how to use that strength on the football field, and he knows how to use that size on the football field. We've seen defensive linemen, right? Some of the smaller defensive linemen who are maybe a little bit more quick-footed and have the ability to use that first step, maybe get off the ball quicker, and maybe be able to use leverage a little bit better. We've seen those defensive linemen have success in the NFL. If you're not careful as a bigger defensive lineman, sometimes you can be slower off the football. Maybe you don't have that quick first step, and you're letting the offensive lineman dictate to you. And that's not the case with TJ Slayton. We'll talk about his first step in a minute, but he has everything that you would want from a stout point of attack, sort of phone booth type of player. And again, just the raw physical strength that he possesses shows up on tape consistently. The ability to get his hands inside and just literally throw players to the side is absolutely on tape. So that is the 1A thing that stood out. And then the nice thing is I had the opportunity as I've gone over to go to that second mini camp practice. And basically he was standing an arm's length away from me. He is a massive human being. So the eyes do not deceive you on tape. In real life, he is the exact same way. And he looks in much better shape, right around that 330-pound mark, which is probably where you want him for the season, maybe down to 325, but nothing too different. But overall, his biggest strength is literally his strength. And then next up is his movement and agility. And simply put, at 330 plus pounds, humans should not be able to move the way that TJ Slayton moves. Quick first step. His 10-second split in the 40-yard dash was in the 95th plus percentile for all defensive linemen over the course of, basically since they've started tracking these numbers at the combine. He is a freak, right? So that's not just comparing 330 plus pound nose tackles that he's in the 95th percentile of for 10-second split. That's your 3 technique, your under tackles, like your 295, 300 pound guys. He's competing with those guys historically, and he's in the 95th percentile at 330 pounds. Just an absolute freak of an athlete. You see him shoot gaps and be able to get, not sideline to sideline, I'm certainly not going to say that, but make an impact down the line of scrimmage and make a play on the running back. I specifically show a clip of that in my article today, which, cheap plug, you can find on PackerReport.com. Subscribe there if you haven't already. You get a ton of great content, but I digress. So make sure to check that out. But you see him make those flash plays. You see him shoot through gaps to get to the quarterback. And then you see rare explosion from a 330-pound guy when he actually has the ability to close to a quarterback, which is a really rare trait. So not only the strength and the size, but the movement ability is really impressive too. There's one play where he shoots through a gap, so the running back has to basically, change which angle he's going at and change directions. So he literally stops on a dime, turns around, and makes a diving tackle on the running back. Like, these are just plays you don't see from human beings that size. Just rare stuff from TJ Slayton. And then so The next thing is effort. So, all right, he's got the size, he's got the strength, he's got the quick first step, he's got all these raw traits. So obviously the issue is that he's not giving effort. Wrong. I see a consistent effort player on tape. And I'm not saying his motor runs insanely hot, 110% on any given play. But I also can't necessarily say that when I went back and watched his tape through those 6 games that I can point to any play and say, well, look at that. That's just poor effort by TJ Slayton. I didn't see that type of player at all. Every defensive tackle has some level of hot and cold, but I thought his motor ran much more hot than it ever did cold. And I didn't see any issues with his effort. And in fact, I was really impressed at how he tried to stay in plays, rally to the football. Now, if he was completely out of the play, this is not someone you're going to see sprinting downfield to try to make a play, but most nose tackles aren't that way. Ryan Pickett was a rare dude in that way, by the way. He was so fun to watch in that regards. But again, I digress. But Slaton is more often than not rallying to the football, making plays, and using good effort and playing through the whistle. So I have no issue with his effort either. One of the things that he does need to improve on is his ability to hold up against double teams, which is kind of the opposite and antithesis of what you would think, right? So you're thinking of this 330 plus pound nose tackle, and you're probably thinking, all right, probably not a great mover, probably not going to help much against the pass, but he's just going to sit in there and eat space, and he can sit in the middle of that line and take up that space so that there's no open gaps. But it's actually kind of not the opposite fully, but there's definitely some of that where that's not his full profile. In fact, I've seen him on a couple occasions make great plays where he has a double team, he splits the double team and makes a play in the backfield. However, far too often he's trying to make a play and not just holding up at the point of attack, not anchoring, and because of that, he's getting washed out of the play. So as his primary job in the NFL is likely going to be run stopper, he needs to learn sooner rather than later that his job is to simply hold up at the point of attack and try to get some movement, or at minimum, don't allow you to be cleared out of that gap and just hold strong as much as possible so your linebackers can shoot up and make that play. So that's an area that he can absolutely improve on. But the great news here is it's because he's trying to do too much. It's not because of poor effort or anything like that. It's just he's trying to do a little bit too much, and he needs to do a better job of just sinking his hips, sinking lower to the ground, getting leverage, and just holding up at the point of attack. Is it something I think he can do? Yes, but absolutely something that he needs to get better at. One thing that I was so pleasantly surprised and happy to see on tape was his ability to reset the line of scrimmage. So if you're not familiar, think of the snap at the 20-yard line, and then the ball is snapped. How does that line of scrimmage change as the course of the play moves on? If you're a defensive lineman, you want to push that pocket backwards, right? Or push the line of scrimmage backwards so that the running backs aren't getting any momentum, that quarterbacks can't step up into their throws. You want to reset the line of scrimmage and push it backwards. All right, so Green Bay has had major issues with that. Kenny Clark is a master at resetting the line of scrimmage. Watch him from when the ball is snapped to where he ends up, and more often than not, he is in the opposing backfield in some capacity. And very rarely is he getting pushed backwards. It just doesn't happen all that often. TJ Slayton is one of the rare players that has the ability to reset that line of scrimmage, again, using that raw strength that he has. The Dean Lowrys, the Kingsley Kikis, the Tyler Lancasters, not so much. And that's been a big issue, to the point where even if Kenny Clark's the only one that is resetting, it can actually almost open up a gap because he's coming up. Everyone else is either there or moving back, and now you've got a gap there that needs to get filled. So having another player that has that potential to reset the line of scrimmage could pay huge dividends for Green Bay. And again, as a defensive tackle on the interior, it's one of the first things I look for, and TJ Slayton showed the ability to do that. Now, the big question with Slayton is, can he be a 3-down player? Is he just a run defender only? And I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. I don't necessarily think that he's, at this point, going to be a pass rush type of player. Like, he's not going to, if you're in an obvious passing down and it's 3rd and 10, right, you're going to have Rashawn Gary, Zadarius Smith, Kenny Clark, Preston Smith, some capacity of those guys, maybe a Kingsley Kiki rotating in. You're going to have your pass rushers on the field. I don't think to begin with that TJ Slayton is going to be in that conversation. I think he's going to be in on more obvious rundowns, on earlier downs, which tend to be more, run pass split. I think that's where his niche is, and I think that's ultimately what he becomes. However, I don't think he's just a run defender. And so often what's happening is as teams on early downs are using more play action and showing that they're going to run, but actually using the passing game against teams in those situations, what's happening is teams are putting their, in Green Bay specifically, are putting their Dean Lowrys and their Tyler Lancasters in there to stop the run. And then it's not a run, and those guys aren't getting off their blocks to get to the quarterback. And that's where I think TJ Slayton can eventually pay dividends, because I think he can get off those blocks, and I think he can shoot gaps, and I think he can get into the backfield, and I think he does have closing speed to get to the quarterback. And that's something that, again, Green Bay's been missing, and you can't play Kenny Clark on every snap. He needs rest. So having a player on early downs that is primarily probably going to be a run stopper, but has some pass rush ability, has the potential to be an important piece to this defense, and something that I think, again, as time goes on, that TJ Slayton's going to have the ability to do. Now, as a pass rusher, he's still developing. He has that raw strength, a quick first step, some explosion to the quarterback at the end, and just kind of closing burst. But he doesn't really have a move set. He doesn't have a plan of attack to get to the quarterback. Those are all things that he's going to have to develop. It's mostly just raw strength and traits, which can get you only so far in the NFL. It helps, and you can't teach that, so it's a huge thing to have, but he needs to put together a full set and repertoire of pass rush moves. And until he does that, almost assuredly he's only an early down player, which the return on investment of that is not as great, which is why a player like this, partially a reason why they fall into the 5th round. This is a passing league. You have to be able to stop the pass. And if you think of it this way, if you're an early rundown player only, like the amount of snaps you can play in a game is probably around like 25 snaps, maybe somewhere around there. Total in a game. So even in a best case scenario for a player like that, in about a game which consists of about, 150, 160 snaps per game, including special teams, he has no special teams value. Maybe he can be on like the kick block team in the middle or something, but for the most part, no special teams value. You're looking at a player that potentially might only give you 15 to 20 snaps per game. So it's tough to get the return on investment on a player like that. But if he can develop a pass rush set, it gives him more skills to potentially stay on the field and maybe longer down in distances and help out as a pass rusher as well. I think he has that talent, but it's definitely something that he still has to develop. Next is staying in shape. And as I watched the 6 games, I didn't see any issues again with his effort, his play weight, or anything like that. But there has been talk that he was up to 380 pounds at one point during his time at Florida. And there's also, when I saw him at rookie minicamp, there were times where just in rookie minicamp, cool-ish weather, I think it was below 70 degrees, not an intense practice, and he was, hands on his sides, huffing and puffing a little bit. Now, at 330, some of that's bound to happen, right? He's a bigger guy, but if he really wants to reach his ceiling, he's got to stay at a prime weight, stay in the diet and just exercise regimen, and make sure that he's in peak physical condition. And I want to be clear here. There's nothing on the tape that I watched this past season or anything other than, again, getting a little bit tired in a mini camp, which doesn't mean all that much, that would lead me to believe that he's not at this point and that he's not 100% bought in to this program and the consistency and staying at the right weight and everything like that. Everything that I have seen in the last year plus leads me to believe that he's got things more down to a science than he did earlier in his career. But it is something that Green Bay is going to have to monitor throughout the course of his career. Maybe my favorite aspect is there was a wow factor to him in every game. In every game, he made a play that my jaw dropped or that I wanted to go back and rewind and watch again, or immediately clip it and post it to Twitter because I was so excited about it. So either check out my Twitter, timeline to see those videos, or check out the article on Packer Report, because there are some really exciting wild plays on tape. And that's not always the case. In fact, of the 5 players that I've watched so far, I would actually make the argument that TJ Slayton had more of those plays than any of the other players, including Royce Newman and Myers and Amari Rodgers and Eric Stokes. I actually think Slayton had more of those plays where I had to pause and say holy crap, this guy can play. He has a wow factor to him, and it's just an innate thing, and some players have it, some don't, and he does, and I just think that's an underrated value, and those things usually turn out to be good things that basically translate to the NFL level. So I'm excited to see how that does in fact translate. A couple of the other ones here, I'm not going to go through all of them. Make sure to check out the article just because we're kind of getting long on time here. But he has good initial burst, but a little bit of slow out of his stance. Now, again, at 330, this is going to happen. But it was inconsistent. So there'd be times where he was able to get up and explode out of his stance. Other times he was a bit slower coming up. So just something that he has to work on to get into a little bit more of a rhythm in that regards. Same thing with block shedding. Has that raw strength and ability to shed blocks. Most of it's due to getting good hands and good leverage. He needs to do that with a little bit more consistency. And that finally is my overarching point here and my final point here. If you're thinking, Andy, we're 15 minutes into this video and this late 5th round pick seems a little bit too good to be true. Like, are you sure you know what you're talking about? Like, what you're telling me sounds like a top 50 pick. That doesn't sound like pick 174 or 5, whatever the heck he was. And you're right. I do think that TJ Slayton has a really impressive upside, but his overall consistency at Florida was lacking. He only had 14 starts, right? Not a ton of snaps overall, and he's still raw as a player. And while there are these incredible flash plays, and he checks literally every single box of things that I would look for from a high-end defensive tackle, he didn't do any of them with any true level of consistency. And consistency is ultimately the name of the game. Now, he is raw enough and young enough and still developing enough that I do think he has a very strong ability to hit his ceiling and to be a really special impact player. He could just as easily not and be out of the league in a couple years. That is the volatility of a player like this. But with a 5th round draft choice, to get somebody that, if they hit their ceiling, to me is a top 50 type of player in any given draft, if he doesn't hit his ceiling but can just become a really good run defender, the 5th round pick easily pays for itself. And at the end of the 5th round, if he completely bombs out of the league, so do 95% of the players taken around that point. No harm, no foul. This is a really strong draft choice for Brian Gutekunst, in my opinion. I love the upside. You just don't see many players with this type of upside at this point in the draft. I love the middle ground. If he doesn't completely meet his upside, but can be a good run defender, you still hit on the pick. And again, the risk here is incredibly low. So without having to go too much further, this is easily one of my favorite picks from Brian Gutekunst in this draft. Really excited about his prospect. I was excited what he showed at the rookie mini camp in limited time that I got to see him. But I'm really excited to see how he translates during training camp, preseason, and then how he can actually do holding up at the point of attack this upcoming season as well. But needless to say, I'm excited about the prospect. That's going to do it for me today. Make sure to check out today's audio podcast with Andrew and Kyle and special guest Dan Dalkey as well. I'm going to be right back here tomorrow, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.